Welcome back, everyone, to Lab 2. This time we're going to be talking about concepts in summarizing research. As a roadmap today, we are going to be talking about a number of things all related to this summarizing of research. The first is going to be talking about peer review. What is peer review? How do we find peer-reviewed articles that we can use in our own research? What are some tactics for finding those articles for these literature searches that we're going to conduct? And then how do we understand the in-text citations when we are reading other people's papers? Building off the in-text citations, we're going to talk about how to do reference lists and then the process of choosing variables for your final project. We're also going to do a small SPSS project at the end, or activity at the end, to help you again reacquaint yourself with SPSS. So first, what is peer review? I mentioned that as researchers, we are doing our own study to test our hypothesis, but we also want to read other people's stuff. And when we do our own research, we want to share that with the world. And we have different methods and different variables we're going to be using in our research. And we write up interesting papers and suggest, hey, I found something interesting. But what we think is interesting and how we think our study had a lot of validity in it may not match what other people think, or the way we share our information might not be as clear as we think it is in our own head. And so science uses a process called peer review. This is when other people who are doing similar kinds of research in the same field evaluate each other's papers for the scientific, academic, or professional value that it entails. So they are the ones who are helping to assess the validity of a project or how much it's actually contributing towards the body of literature. So this typically requires that the researcher who does the project submits a write-up of their project, an APA paper, as a publication to an academic journal. And there are a lot of academic journals. Every field has some journal that is primarily dedicated to that field, and there's a lot of overlap. For instance, in my field of personality and social psychology, the biggest one you can publish in is the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, but publishing in the Psychological Bulletin is also a good way. Sometimes some social psychologists might be publishing on a very niche topic, such as well-being, in which case that Psychology of Well-being journal might work. And so scientists have to kind of evaluate, where do I think my publication is going to best be received, and that the audience of that journal will be able to read the research that I have produced. And there's a lot of kind of tactics when it comes to where to submit. But that's beyond the scope of this course. The important thing you need to know is that when research is done, it is sent to a journal, and the journal has a panel of peers, those are again other people who work in the same field, who can evaluate that research for its value. So what are these reviewers looking for? Those are the peer reviewers. First of all, they're looking for the significance of whatever question, hypothesis, theory that was examined in the research. So they're looking at it not just to the field that they're interested in, what is the kind of internal value here, but also to society. What is going to be the impact of this question? They're also looking at novelty. How much is it just recreating what's already been done, which is good. Science wants to be iterative. It wants to kind of show that one person's study had validity and can be redone. It has some replicability. But also we want to kind of move forward with science. So coming up with new ideas, new ways of testing things is going to be valued by peer reviewers. We want to know the interestingness of the idea. Is it something that everybody kind of expects, or is it something that, again, really pushes forward, kind of pushes our understanding of the construct or phenomenon that's being addressed? We want to know that there is a lot of validity in it. So does the method have that high construct, internal and external validity, which we talked about in lecture this week? So it's how much is it measuring what you think it is? How much does it hold together, and how much does it apply to the rest of the world? And then, are there appropriate analyses? Remember that researchers can conduct a lot of different analyses depending on the style of their variables, how the variables might interact, how much variation is in their variables, and then are those analyses interpreted correctly? A lot of what you learn in statistics and a lot of what grad school teaches, if you're interested in going to academia, is how to choose analyses and how to correctly interpret it so that you're not over-assuming what the analysis is telling you. Peer reviewers do a lot of looking at those analyses to tell us, yes, this is a fair interpretation of what your data show. Finally, researchers are looking for that good writing. Even the best research needs to be communicated well, and if it's just really challenging for a reviewer to get through and figure out what's even being studied here, then it's not going to really help the scientific community. So there's a lot of editing of how to communicate the idea. What are not peer-reviewed articles, though? What are things that researchers don't really hang their hats on or, cite in their own research? Well, we don't cite and we don't look at newspaper articles. While newspaper might have a lot of interesting things that are going on in the world, we don't use those largely because of bias that might be introduced into the newspapers, trying to go for those headlines. The same thing for magazines, which are just trying to kind of sell the cover topics. News sites, there's so much out on the internet, and it's really challenging to understand what is good information, what is not. But even if it's from a reputable source, there's always going to be it's kind of written for a purpose rather than just to communicate what's been found. And all of these examples, these newspapers, magazines, and news sites, none of them are really reviewed by anything other than the superior who's saying, oh yeah, this looks like it'll get us clicks or sales in the newspaper, magazine. So we don't consider those having been reviewed by experts. There's also online blogs, which is a big thing for a long time. Psych Daily and Mind Hacks are pretty common ones. Again, these might be written by experts initially or people who know a lot about the field, but they aren't reviewed. There's nobody kind of watching in and saying, what is the value of this research, and was everything kind of done well in this research? And then, of course, anything else that you might see, like, haha, your best friend's TikTok. Of course, we know that those aren't good sources of information. So all of these things might have interesting articles. In fact, you might have gotten into psychology because you read something cool in a magazine or a newspaper or a news site that somebody shared with you, and that's great. But those aren't peer-reviewed articles. All of those that are best written are actually pulling from peer-reviewed articles. They have found something peer-reviewed and are kind of talking about what that other researcher found. So if we can't use these really easy to access online media as our peer-reviewed, where do we get them? Where are the best sources to help us find peer-reviewed articles that can help answer the questions that we as researchers might have? Well, the place we're going to go are to these peer-reviewed databases. Remember, peer-reviewed are the gold standards, and they are available online through databases such as PsycInfo, PubMed, Web of Science, Google Scholar. Those are the primary ones for psychology and a lot of behavioral sciences in general, but of course every field has its own database. And if you ever have trouble accessing any of these, you can probably go through the VCU library to find the titles, to find the articles you're looking for. Especially if you're reading an online source and it does cite something that says that this researcher conducted this study at this time, you might be able to find that through VCU library. That being said, I want to make sure right now, I'm going to say it later as well, never pay for an article. You are part of the VCU community. VCU community and the library pay a lot of money to have access to these different databases. Every year, the subscription to these databases and subscription to journals in general is actually really expensive and is a topic we're going to talk about at the end of this semester. So it's very expensive, and so VCU is putting that money so that we can have access to all of these articles so that you don't have to, and you can conduct research without worrying about, shelling out. So in order to showcase how to use the database, I'm going to be using screenshots from PsycInfo, which is a psychology-specific database. You're going to be typing in key terms. You're going to be using different drop-downs so that you can find what you're looking for. But these techniques should work for most database search engines, whether it's EBSCO or Google Scholar or Web of Science. Any of those will use the same kind of strategies that we're going to talk about here. To access PsycInfo, which is again the major database for psychology, you're going to first go to vcu.edu and then click on that little 3- drop down so that you can select libraries under the resources. The other option is you can just go to the library website, library.vcu.edu, and it'll take you to the same thing. On this page, you're going to see a tab where you can type in your search item, or you can go to the journal finder, and that's what we're going to do here. We're not going to type anything. Don't type the name of the article or the name of the journal in that search bar. Instead, just go to Journal Finder, and on that new page, you can scroll down to Popular Databases, and number 4 there is PsycInfo. You'll also see a bunch of other ones here. So there again is PubMed and Web of Science and JSTOR, Google Scholar. These are all ones that you can use yourself depending on your field. And then once you're in PsycInfo, you can start your literature review. Before you just start typing in keywords and clicking next and trying to find stuff, really think through what you are trying to find. Come up with a hypothesis or an idea of what your variable will be, or what that variable will relate to. How will these variables relate, and in what ways can you maybe use keywords to search for that relationship? This will really help you to craft your searches so that you are spending the best time on PsycInfo and you're not kind of falling down rabbit holes of, oh, is this article useful to me? I don't know. You want to have a plan. So put a lot of thought into what keywords you think will be most productive. Just like any Google search, like you guys do regularly, the keywords are the best way to find what you are looking for. Speaking of keywords, you want to be as exhaustive as possible. That means use every kind of triangulation of the topic as possible. And this is going to require using a lot of synonyms for your variables. For instance, I might be a researcher interested in how stress might be related to increased food consumption. As we get more stressed, do we eat more? And so I might have a keyword of stress and food consumption, and that's a good start. But again, we want to be exhaustive. We want to come up with a lot of different ways of triangulating it, because some research might not use the word stress in the abstract, or food consumption might be a very niche field of study, whereas there might be other keywords that could help to open up and find other articles that are related to my topic. So for stress, I might look up other words in place of stress, such as trauma and anxiety, tension, pressure, strain, and any of those related to food consumption. And similarly, I might have different synonyms for that food consumption, such as feasting or eating, digesting, nutrition, binging, dieting. Any of those could work as synonyms. And I'll try multiple combinations of these keywords to be as exhaustive as possible. And you really know you've kind of hit it when you start finding the same articles over and over again. You realize you've kind of used up the synonyms that are available for your keywords. Oh yeah, synonyms. For those of you who love Simpsons. The way you use your keywords also matters how they overlap. So using a single keyword like worry will get all of the topics related to worry. But you might want to kind of triangulate and get other variables to say, I'm not just looking for worry, I'm looking for things like worry and loneliness. But this might actually reduce the subset. You see here the Venn diagram that when you are looking at both at the same time, this Boolean and, you're going to lose the things in worry that don't have loneliness in the topic. And you're going to lose the things in loneliness that don't have worry. So sometimes using a single keyword is good. Sometimes using multiple is also good. So one is for breadth and one is for depth. If you really want to triangulate what you are looking for, the very specific kinds of articles, using multiple keywords can help. You can also go even further and use even more keywords. So here is worry, loneliness, and gender. Again, getting very specific to really find the kind of articles you're looking for. Otherwise, you might be overwhelmed with just too much out there about just worry or just gender or just loneliness. You can also go beyond just an and operator and start using an or. And this is again going to change that Venn diagram overlap. Instead of just the center, now you're going to get worry that is also in an article with either loneliness or gender. So everything that has worry and loneliness, everything that has worry and gender are going to be together in this search. You also might find that your word is a little bit inflexible and you want to add flexibility to it, in which case you can use the asterisk or wildcard operator. What this does is takes a word and it appends it and says, I want to look up any keyword that starts with these letters. So in this case, loneliness might have only a subset of articles out there that are actually discussing loneliness and have the word loneliness in them. But if you type in LONE with an asterisk, that's going to look up any word, any article that has a word that starts with LONE, such as articles that have lonely or lone or loneliness in them. So this could happen if you're studying anxiety. Maybe you don't want just anxiety, you also want anxious. So that ANX beginning with the wildcard operator, that asterisk, will help to get both anxiety and anxious into your research. Now, once you have your keywords kind of decided, and you can always be adding more keywords as you go through, but it's good to have a base idea of what you're going to use, you then go into PsycInfo, and it's going to have a lot of options for you as you search. That top part has the basic put in the keywords, but you can also select by the field. Where do you want this keyword to be found? And a couple of good options for where the keyword is located is in the abstract of the article or as a keyword. Sometimes researchers will submit specific keywords that they think are very relevant to their article when they publish it. So they'll say, this article is about stress or loneliness or anxiety. So I want to make sure that anybody who's searching for this doesn't need to dig through my abstract or dig through my article. They know this is what it's about. That is my keyword. So that's a great place to start. So when you're typing in your keyword, you can select an optional field of abstract or keywords to help limit your findings. Because a big part of this is going to be limiting your findings. There's so much research out there. You want to make sure you're not kind of over inundated with research that you find out you can't use later. That's a lot of extra effort spent. You also want to make sure that you are finding only peer-reviewed articles down in the corner there. Make sure that's checkboxed. And also recent stuff. Psych has been around for a long time. So there's a lot of articles going back to the 1960s and 70s, but science has also come a long way, and we've improved our methods, and we've kind of replicated things or found that stuff doesn't replicate. And so modern research is going to be more accessible, and it's going to be a better read. It's also going to have more citations of other modern research that you can use. So you want to make sure down in that publication date that you are setting it for things that are since the year 2000. That's kind of thought of as the modern era of research. In a few years, we might shift it to 2010 or more recent. It's kind of a point of discussion right now. So once you've checked that and you've typed in your keywords, you click OK, and it will take you to a page that looks something like this. It has a bunch of titles of your articles. It has the authors and maybe a little bit of a description of the study, something pulled from the abstract, and some links you can click to access those articles. When you first click this, you might see that a lot of them don't have that linked full text so that you can actually find the article and actually read the article. So make sure you go over to the left-hand side and click that linked full text button. This is going to make sure you're not seeing a lot of things that you can't access. You also want to verify that that publication date is set to 2000 to 2025 to recent. And then I like to look at the page options and see the standard view. This has a little one line of the abstract. You can also go title only if you're just trying to skim a lot better, or you can go in detailed if you want to see the entire abstract in front of you. So instead of having to open the article, you can read that full abstract to see if it applies to what you want. Once you've decided on which article you're interested in, you can either click the linked full text or the get it at VCU. Sometimes if it doesn't have linked full text, you find an article, you've not clicked that link full text, VCU will have other sources where you can access it. Once you click it, it'll take you to another page. In this case, it has a couple of options of where you can get the full text. I ended up clicking the Taylor and Francis. I found that the EBSCO in this particular example didn't actually connect well. So sometimes you need to try out a couple of different links. The first one might not work the way you think it does. But when I click the Taylor and Francis, it's going to open up another page which has the article there, that assessing the relationship between drug use initiation age and racial characteristics. And this will have the entire article visible for you. And usually it has a view PDF version as well if you want to download that PDF and store it somewhere else. You like to print it out, whatever is your way of doing it, this new page will have that. Oh, there you go, that's what to click. So when you're searching PsycInfo, make sure you are restricting it to human, not AI generated articles. You want them to be in English, because we're doing English in this course. You want to make them recent, 2000 to present. The more recent your article is, the better not better it is, but the more it's going to help you out and kind of showcase what's currently being done in the field. and you want to make sure that it's a peer-reviewed journal. So sometimes they'll sneak through some dissertations or meta-analyses or just review papers which are summarizing a lot of other research that's been done. Those can be interesting, but they're not what we are going to be using for this project this time. You want to make sure you're using synonyms and also antonyms, so the opposite words. Make sure that you're saying does not include these other antonyms. Use both those and or operators, and then that asterisk of the wildcard asterisk. And then sometimes you can find a term finder tool on PsycInfo, which you can use to help you kind of come up with new keywords that are related to the ones that you've typed in. You can also use other databases besides PsycInfo, such as I showed you. We have access to PubMed and Web of Science through Library, but also Google Scholar. That's at scholar.google.com. Google is something that most people use in their regular day-to-day as a search engine. This works very much the same by going to this website. It just only searches articles. You can again make sure that you click for peer-reviewed articles, not just dissertations or random articles that are out there. And you can also make, it has a way to indicate whether you want to have something accessible, a linked full text, so that you can isolate and actually read the article. I want to reiterate here, I said it before, but you should never pay for an article. If you can't find an article, you see an article title that you think this is perfect, and maybe you see the abstract, you think this is perfect, this is exactly what I need, and you can't find a way to access it through PsycInfo or Google Scholar, that's when you want to reach out to your TAs, and your TAs can help you get it. If they can't help you, they can pass it on to me. I have ways of finding access to these things as well. So make sure you are not paying for it. If you find it, just go through other methods. So as you're going through these PsycInfo keyword searches in your Google Scholar, you want to scan the entire page of results that are there and see if anything sticks out. You don't have to go orderly through each one and read it. That might tire you out. A lot of literature review and research searching starts with scanning. So what sticks out, what catches your eye, and if it does, go ahead and read that abstract either by opening it or by getting the detailed view in PsycInfo so you can kind of see, is this actually what I think I want to read about? If after reading the abstract, the article still seems relevant to you, then go through all those steps to save the article as a PDF or to kind of track it. Sometimes PsycInfo has a folder that you can indicate which articles you want to come back to, but you want to make sure that you've noted it somewhere so that you can reference it later. One of the worst things that can happen to a researcher is spend hours and hours finding all of these really interesting articles and titles and then finding out that they didn't save them, and now they have to go through all the work of re-finding those really interesting articles. You should also keep scrolling through the different pages. I know Google traditionally, if you can't find it on the first page, then it's not there, but that's not always true with articles. So the longer it takes you to look at it, make sure that you are not, you're kind of only going until it's no longer relevant. But sometimes you do have to go through multiple pages. It's got to be there somewhere. And do this for every keyword. And you really know you've kind of reached the end of your search when you start again seeing the same things appearing. You're not finding any new information. That's when you can kind of say, all right, I got enough. Or, you know, maybe you've just reached, I have 10 articles that I can use for this. I'm feeling great. Now, your research study for this semester doesn't need to have a ton of articles, but as a researcher, that is typically what you do, is you want to have, you know, a good number of articles before you kind of take that next step. So, it feels silly to have to say this, but once you find the articles, you want to actually read them. Just reading the title and the abstract might feel very satisfying and feel, oh, I totally know what was studied here, and it has a little finding in that abstract, but no, you got to read the whole article, because sometimes it's not clear, or there's a lot of information you can pick up. And something I know, we're collectors, like having a bookshelf where you look at the books that are on your bookshelf and you think and dream of all the things you're going to read. And you feel so good about this collection because you're going to read so much, but we don't actually read them. The same can happen with articles. Make sure that you are actually reading the content that you have found. Otherwise, all of that work was kind of wasted. What you're looking for are the main ideas. You're looking for supporting details. You're looking to avoid any unimportant information. You're looking to analyze and simplify. So I just went through that Midas there. Again, the main idea, You're looking for supporting details. You're cutting out the chaff and focusing on what is actually important, and you're simplifying that. When you are reading, you need to understand it. Go slow if you need to. Take breaks. But you want to, as you're reading, not only kind of make sure that you're not glazing over, but also re-summarize the content in your own words. Take notes. Don't just jot down quotes from the article. You want to be able to go to your grandmother and tell them what the article was about so that they really understand. Because that shows that you understand. The best way to understand something is to be able to talk about it to someone else. You should be taking those kind of notes. These articles can be complex and the reading can seem daunting. So what I'm going to have is a bunch of tactics for you to make this process a lot easier. I've already given you one, which is to summarize as you're going, to take breaks, but I'm going to give you a few more here because this can feel overwhelming and it doesn't need to be. A really important tactic when you're going into an article is to understand the structure. Nearly every research article that's published today is formatted in the same way, and you can really use this to advantage if you know where to look for different kinds of information. So we showed this in Lab 1, this flow of how the article is written. We're just going to append on there the abstract here. That is when you have a brief overview of the article. This is what you're going to read when you are doing this literature search, you're in PsycInfo, and you're trying to figure out, should I even download this article? Once you have decided that the abstract was interesting, then you start reading through the introduction, and you can see this flow from introduction to method to results to discussion. The intro is showing the problem and it's reviewing previous research. The method is that how was the research conducted, the research is what was found, and then the discussion is the interpretation. I spent a lot of time last week talking about the difference between the what is the data versus what does the data mean. So knowing where that information is going to be can really help you. And then, of course, there's a references section, which lists all of the articles that were referenced in the article so that you can see the previous research. When you know this flow, you can really use that to your advantage. First, make sure you fully understand that abstract for reading on. What is it going to be talking about? What are you about to read? You can kind of frame your mind. What are the variables that they're interested in? How did the research generally on a big, broad scale look at this relationship? What do they think that they found? All of that information is in that one abstract paragraph. And what are the primary variables of interest? Are they your variables? Are they slightly different? Go into it with open eyes. Then you want to skim. Don't just start reading. Don't go, paragraph 1, I'm going to start reading through. Skim the whole thing first. See what the flow is. Get a feel for how long is the introduction? How much do I have to get through? Are there section headers that are going to be helpful to me to kind of scaffold my reading? What kind of results section is it looking at? Do I really have to get involved in it? Is it going to be overwhelming statistics and maybe I can just skip it for now? Because you really do want to focus just on that introduction and discussion the first time you go through. Those are where you're going to have the meat of an article talking about the why are we doing this and what do we think we found. This is going to familiarize you with the topic that the researcher is studying. Maybe it's a new variable that you don't know as much about, or the way they are looking at it is novel to you. It's also going to have them citing other research that they've used, so you can kind of know what has been done already and maybe use those for your own sources. So as you get familiarity with the topic through that introduction discussion, it'll better prepare you to then look at the methods and results, which have more of the hard methods of what did we do and what were the analyses that were run, which is very important information, but not the second step of your review. So you may, during this whole process, as you're skimming through the introduction, say, wait, I thought that this was what I wanted, but it really has nothing to do, and they're not finding stuff that helps me to know the relationship between my variables, in which case you just saved yourself a lot of time by skimming rather than trudging through that introduction first and then finally realizing it after you've spent an hour trying to make your way through this paper. Once you've decided, yes, it does meet my needs and it is interesting and it has variables that I want to know about and they have interesting findings, go on to step 3, and this is where you begin the reading process. This is when you are carefully reading through, taking note of those most important take-home messages. Again, how would you talk about this to your grandmother? Make note of any terminology that you don't understand, because those are things that you're going to want to understand and you'll probably see in other articles, so you can look them up or maybe use them as keywords once you do understand them. So again, don't just kind of full jump into a research article. That's a good way to use a lot of expended energy, a wasted energy. Instead, go through this process to really decide, is that article worth it for me? Some hints as you're going through of things to think about. Ask, what are the variables that this researcher is looking at, and why was the researcher interested in them? What is the main hypothesis? Every article will tell you what is the question that is trying to be asked, and then why does the researcher think that that hypothesis is true? Why does the researcher think those variables are related in that way? This is a good chance for you to get practice looking for what a hypothesis looks like, because you are going to be having to write your own hypothesis, and you'll be using the same kind of flow of presenting the information, then telling the reader what your hypothesis is and why you think that is true. You get to the methods and research and results section. You can tell how they measured and operationalized these variables. Again, talking about validity. Is it measuring what they think they were measuring? And then what are the key findings? Do these findings make sense to you? Does the author's conclusion work with what you are reading as well? Do you have any questions or think, oh, maybe there's a different way of doing this, or I don't agree with them in some way, or maybe they're brilliant and I never thought about it that way. This is perfect. So you need to be looking for this concept so that if you were talking to someone else, maybe they have questions that you could have thought of already as well. Sometimes talking to other people about what you've read and talking about the conclusion, other people could have ideas. Research can be a collaborative thing as well. So you also want to look for how much does the research affect our understanding of the world? How much is it kind of have this external validity? How is it generalizable to other populations? And how does it move the scientific pendulum forward instead of backwards? So most of what I've talked about so far has been going through the major body of the paper. You started with the abstract, then you were looking through the introduction discussion, maybe you made it to the results and the method section to really get that in-depth understanding of what the researcher was doing. And when you finish the discussion, you might say, whew, I now know everything I've summarized. I can just put this away and move on to the next paper, but don't. Don't stop there. There is an entire section of very important and useful information in every research article, and that is the reference section. This reference section, this list of all of the citations that the previous researcher has used, that could be a resource to you too, because it's going to have really good sources. As you're reading through the article, you're going to see that there's going to be a lot of in-text citations that will link to that references section. So if you see a point in the article that you thought was really intriguing or didn't know about, and you want to know what did the researcher read that made them think this way, or where did that information come from, go to the reference section and get that article for yourself. You can take that title or that author and look them up in PsycInfo instead of a keyword, and you can find that article and get some really good information. The references section is so often overlooked by students when it is almost doing half of the work for you. So go back, collect all these articles. You should also make sure to reread the article at a later point. Sometimes the first time you go through an article, you're just getting the information kind of on a surface level. You're trying your hardest, you're taking notes, but coming back to it at another time is going to be very helpful, especially for the articles that you found very useful, because there's always going to be stuff that you missed, something that you didn't understand perfectly the first time around, and you're not expected to have understood it perfectly the first time around. You guys are not pro researchers. This is just learning how to do it. So coming back and skimming over, marking sections that you just put a big question mark on and say, I don't know what was going on here. I kept glazing over when I read through. Let me give it another shot later. Some of the methods and results sections you might find challenging at the beginning of this course, but as we go through and we talk more about methods, you might be able to come back and say, oh, now I know why the researcher chose to do X or Y, or why they wanted to manipulate in this way, or why they used that analysis. So make note of those places you skimmed or were confused so that you can come back to them. Speaking of the references section, this is my opportunity to reiterate that scientific writing involves incorporating other research into it. It is not just one individual's brainchild, what they think about the variables, but it's what they think in the context of what everybody else has found already, how their thoughts agree with what's been done, or a different or a novel way of looking at the relationship between variables. And so part of writing is referencing other people's work and what other people have done. And as we write and include all of these sources, it can get kind of confusing identifying what is the author's ideas versus what are the ideas of the people the author is referencing. And this increases the risk for plagiarism. Plagiarism is any kind of intentional or unintentional sharing of information as your own when it belongs to someone else. So we want to make sure that we indicate when an idea belongs or came from someone else, not ourselves. So there are very strict standards for doing this, for citing, summarizing, referencing, and generally formatting your articles so that it is clear again, what are my ideas versus what are the ideas that I'm pulling from someone else. Now this is likely different. This APA style is likely different from other papers you've written. In English, you might use the MLA style, or if you're in history, you might use the Chicago style. They're going to look similar, but they have very distinct differences. Now, I don't want to get into why there are so many versions, why people can't decide on how to format. Just know that for psychology and behavioral sciences, APA style is the style that will be used. And so anything that you know about MLA and Chicago, great for you. We won't be using it. So if you are new to this, this is when I suggest you get that APA publication manual, which I put as a recommended textbook in this course. You can also look up online. There's lots of resources out there about APA style. Purdue OWL is the one that comes to my mind. So make sure to have those resources as you are writing. Now, I already mentioned that citations are important because of distinguishing between your work or someone else's, your ideas or someone else's. So when writing, it is assumed that anything that is not cited is your own, and anything that is not your own has to be cited. There has to be some reference to whose idea and whose work was it. And readers also want to know, where did you get the ideas and the information that you're sharing? Not all of it can be yours, so where are you pulling it from so that they can then go and check it, so they can do better literature reviews and see if they agree with what's been done in the past, and maybe they want to fact check or read up more. This is also a useful way for them to find out who wrote the paper and is there any bias in it. So you might see that an article is published by a big corporate research entity that is really trying to push a certain kind of medicine or something. Who is funding it? Is it by the government or is it by individual universities? You want to know that so you can see how much do I trust that there wasn't any kind of manipulation or interpretation that might not match my kind of approach or might have some kind of bias in it. As you're reading through and writing your own papers, you're going to be indicating what are other people's ideas through what are called in-text citations. Most of the information in a paper is coming from summarizations of other people's work, and so these paraphrasing ideas are going to be spread throughout, and each time there's a paraphrasing, it's going to have that in-text citation. I want to be clear here what I'm talking about with paraphrase, that is not quotes. You might read an article and think, wow, that's a really interesting point that they made. I want to make sure I put it in my article. You don't just copy and paste the text. That is a quotation surrounded by quotation marks. A paraphrase is instead this summarization. It's the trying to reinterpret it in your own words to show that you clearly understand it and can put it in. Now, just because you've said it in your own words doesn't mean it's your idea anymore. You still have to cite it as somebody else's original idea that kind of gave you the seed in your head, but you want to say it in your words. And the citation at the end of a paraphrase will have the author's name and the year of the publication that you pulled it from. So we found it in an article by Dooley 2024. You want to include Dooley 2024 in there. You do not, in your text anywhere, include the title of the paper, the name of the journal, or any author's first name. It is only the last names and the year of publication. For example, here are two ways that you might see in-text citations while you're reading. So the first one is an embedded citation in the sentence. So you might see a classic study by Wegner, Schneider, Carter, and White in 1987 suggests that suppressing unwanted thoughts can actually make them more salient in working memory. So here it's part of the sentence. Talking about the authors is part of the sentence, and then you have the year of the publication that Wegner, Schneider, Carter, and White did as parentheses. You don't include the journal name, you don't include the title of the article, just those authors' last names and then the year in parentheses. Or you might see it cited at the end of a sentence. So you summarize what the author said and then reference them. So a well-tested and widely used measure of trait mindfulness is the Mindfulness Attention and Awareness Scale. And then we cite Brown and Ryan 2003 at the end. In this case, Brown and Ryan weren't part of the subject of the sentence. Their names weren't necessary in any part of that statement, but you do want to make sure credit is given where credit is due. Now notice the difference between the ands here. This is an important APA indicator. And is used in a sentence when you're embedding the citation. Use that and. But if you're putting it at the end and you have multiple authors, you put that ampersand symbol to distinguish the authors. Now, of course, this isn't an issue if there's only a single author. It's Dooley 2024. You would just put one name followed by a comma followed by the year. You can see that Brown and Ryan has a comma separating the author's names and the year. Going back to my point about the difference between a quotation and a paraphrase, this summarizing in your own words versus copying and pasting it, I want to say that researchers rarely, if ever, use direct quotes. You don't find them in research. Summarization is everything. So you want to get practice summarizing and synthesizing. There is very few reasons and rationale for me to see any kind of direct quote in your final paper. It has to be a really clear why it was needed to not be summarized, why it needed to be quote. Because that's the only time that quotes are used, when the exact wording is essential to comprehension. The way it was said by that previous author is the perfect way for us to understand it, and there's no other way it can be interpreted without losing some aspect of it. And that is almost never true. It's the only times it's true is maybe for items, or there's a specific quote that is resounded through history that needs to be said. If you're putting an MLK quote in that, don't summarize it. If you really need it, you can quote that. But again, try to focus on the summarization. And when you are summarizing, that's when you are going to put those parentheses around and make sure that you include a page number. So you have you have quotation marks, I think I said that, and then the page number at the end along with the last name and year of publication. Again, you don't have any article name or journal or first names. You're just including that page number extra. As you're reading the article, of course, you're going to see a lot of citation because there's a lot of ideas out there. These in-text citations that have just the author's last name and the year. But we need more information if we're going to find that article and see where that article came from. All of that extra information is stored at the end of the paper in this reference list. So all in-text citations that are in the text must have an associated reference in the reference list at the end of a paper. Now, this always comes at the end, and all of the references are provided in alphabetical order, and there are very specific rules for how those are written. The format is going to change depending on whether it's a journal article or a book, though the journal article is the most common one, and so that's the one I'm going to be talking about today. It's pretty ubiquitous. No articles that were not cited in the paper, so just things that you think were interesting, should appear in the reference section. If it is an interesting article, then you should talk about it in your writing somewhere. If the author thought it was interesting, they should talk about it somewhere. You can't have these kind of extra references littered throughout the reference list. So I've mentioned that there are very specific APA rules for how a journal article is cited in that reference list. And this is going to be consistent formatting across any article and any reference list that you're looking at. When you are looking at each entry in a reference list, it's going to have all of this information in it. First, it's going to start with the author names, and this is going to have them presented in alphabetical order with the author's last name followed by their first initial and their second initial. You will never write full first names in here, and then you'll separate the second to last and the last author by an ampersand. As you see in the example, you have Grammas DL and ampersand Schwartz JP. No first names. Now, I said that they're presented in alphabetical order. That's each reference is presented in alphabetical order, but the authors are actually not presented in alphabetical order. They are presented in the order that you see in the article. This is because often there is a first author, the primary author, the person who put a lot of work into it, and maybe there's the second author who is the runner-up, who is the advisor or really helped, but maybe didn't do as much work as the first author. And then there's sometimes other authors kind of cascading down who helped a little bit but weren't as pivotal to the writing of that article. So we want to make sure that credit is given where credit is due. So the person who has their name at the top of the article, that first author, they should also be the first name we see in our citation. So in this instance, Grammas was the person who put the most effort and was the primary author of this article. Their name should come first. It just happens that G comes before S in this example. After you have the authors in the order that they were in the article and making sure there's no full first names, you're going to put the year, and this is in parentheses, similar to how you'll see in the in-text citation. It's then followed by a period. Why? I don't know. There's a period at the end. Do it. Then you have the article title. You want to make sure that the first word is capitalized. You're using sentence case. So if you have a colon in the middle, like a subheader or a subtitle, you can capitalize that next word as well after the colon. This also has a period at the end. It's basically like the title is a sentence. If I see the title with all capitals, that's going to be incorrect. You're going to be deducted. The opposite is true for the journal name. The journal name, every word is capitalized. And there's of course ands and ofs and thes. Those can be in lowercase, but all of the main words are capitalized. It's also italicized. This is to help visually distinguish it from the article title. And everything so far has been followed by a period. This journal name is followed by a comma. That's because you're about to go segue right into the volume and issue numbers, which are telling you about the journal, where this article came from in that specific journal. So the volume is just a number there, and it is italicized. It's followed by a comma. If there is no issue, if there is an issue, it's followed by a comma. If there's no issue, just kind of end it. If there's an issue number, so we'll see this in some articles where they'll have volume 1, but there's 3 issues of it. Maybe it's volume 1 is the first quarter, so the January, February, and March issues will come out as volume 1, and so that'll be issue number 1, 2, and 3. These may exist, they may not. If you do have one of them, just put it in parentheses, and this one is not italicized. I know I'm switching a lot between what's italicized and what is not. This one is not italicized. Finally, finally you put the page numbers in the journal article, or in the journal where that article is from. Sorry, that was a little confusing. The page numbers in the journal where that article is pulled from. You have to recall that a lot of articles are published in a single journal at the same time. So if you were to get an edition of a journal, it would have 10 or 20 articles in it, all related to different things. The actual article you are reading is only a subset of that specific volume and issue. You need to tell which pages those are. This is a kind of holdover from when people were actually looking up the articles in hard copies. So they needed to know how to flip through the journal to find the article they were looking for. It's still a practice we do, so make sure that those page numbers are included there. So here's an example of turning all of that information into an actual citation. On the right side, you'll see there's the article from Elsevier, which has the title and it has the order of the authors. You see some first names there. It's Debbie Grammas and Jonathan Schwartz. And there's going to be the information at the top under the name of the journal and the volume and issue, the date, and what pages it was pulled from in that journal. All that information is over on the left-hand side in the table we already saw. And then in the bottom right, you see the full example of this citation. You can see how the last name is there in the order that it's presented on the article. You can see that year followed by a period. You've got the sentence case of the title, and then the italicized journal name, the volume, the non-italicized issue number, and the non-italicized page number. And that is a correct citation. Now you might also see what's called a DOI. That's if you look at the body image, the Elsevier there, you'll see https:/DOI. That is a URL reference. It's kind of a modern phenomenon of having a DOI so that people can link to it. A lot of articles will not include the DOI. A lot of articles will include the DOI. If you see a string of internet, internet site, the DOI, that's great. You can click it to find that journal article out there. It's a great resource, but it is not actually, I'm not going to include it in your APA style. Now that we know how each individual reference looks, we can see them in context. I have mentioned that there's alphabetical order. So you would have the article by Cummings before the article by Who, and that article before Tidwell and Underwood. Those are in alphabetical order, even if the actual authors' names within the individual reference are not in alphabetical order. So now that you've seen what a correct APA reference list looks like, I'm going to go over some of the common mistakes. I have mentioned that you need to list all of the authors in proper order. So within the reference, you need to have them in author order by first author, second author, etc. But the actual reference list is in alphabetical order by the first author's name. You need to make sure you are not including those author first names. There's some other styles where first name is included, other non-APA styles. So don't do that in APA. You also need to watch for those commas, periods, and italics. I know it switches up a lot. Where do you put it? Where do you not italicize? But keeping track of that is an important part of how the reference section is listed. And also make sure that you're capitalizing correctly. The article title is sentence case. The journal title is all capitals. These are the common things that we see. You're inevitable to get it wrong somewhere. So just keep an eye out for these. Also, pay attention to whether there's a journal issue number. It's not always there. Some volumes are kind of published back to back. There's no separate numbers for the issues. So you don't have to include it unless it is actually part of the journal article. Whew. Now that you guys are experts in how to do an in-text citation and make a reference list, it's time to talk about your first lab assignment. Here you're going to be selecting what variables you want to use for your research study. Now, I've asked you guys to fill out a survey. If you haven't already, go ahead, pause, and go fill out that survey. Especially if you're one of the first round of people who filled it out and it felt kind of short. We've fixed it so that now you should take it and fill out all of the variables so that your peers can have access to the data. What I want you to do for this assignment is choose which variables you want to use for your research paper. You have two options for how you choose this. The first is you can pick two continuous variables. Remember, continuous variables are ones that don't have clear demarcations between levels. They kind of flow between. This is going to be a lot of the depression or risk-taking variables. So for example, we might say, is there a positive relationship between sleep duration and body mass index in adult women? Here, you see that sleep duration, how long you slept, is a continuous variable. It could be a little, it could be a lot. And body mass index is also a continuous variable. You have a kind of cascading number and score for BMI. The second option is you can pick one categorical variable to relate to one continuous variable. A categorical is when there are clear demarcations between the different levels. So here we might have, do women report less sleep duration than men? So women versus men, that is a categorical variable the way we're treating it. And then you have sleep duration, which is a continuous variable here. So you kind of think through as you were taking the survey which variables were interesting to you, and I'll have a slide in a second that shows those variables. And my tip to you is that as you were choosing what variables, you might want to go use some of these article search strategies to look up keywords, see if you find any interesting articles about any of the variables that you took that might kind of be that jumping point for you to work on your research article, because our next lab assignment will be a summary of a research article that you found related to the variables that you selected. So just so you have a reference, here are the variables that were available from the survey that you took. So you have on the left side the list of continuous variables and the ones that we're treating as continuous variables versus the ones on the left or on the right, which are the categorical variables. Hopefully I said that correctly. The left is the continuous variables, the categorical are on the right. Look through these, see if you can come up with anything in your head, hypotheses about how these are related, then go do a little mini lit search to see if you can find anything interesting, and then indicate there's a link on Canvas that you can click and it'll be a quick survey, quick quiz to choose which option you're choosing and what variables you're choosing. Okay, one last thing for today's lab. So in lecture, we talked about the measures of central tendency and dispersion or spread and how we calculated that with the quiz to know the context of our 16 out of 20. Well, I've told you that every week we're going to have some kind of SPSS practice. This week, we're going to practice getting those descriptives in SPSS. So you should go find that data file again that you used from last week, that SPSS data file _ psych317.sav. Maybe it's still in your downloads folder. Maybe it's wherever you saved it. If you needed to resave it, it is available on Canvas. You're going to open this in SPSS through whichever way you used, whether it was your own software or through the app to go, and get access to it. You can pause here until you open it, and then we'll move forward. The first method of getting these descriptives is going to be similar to one that we did last week, which is going through the frequencies window. So you're going to go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, Frequencies, and then when that window opens, instead of choosing the race ethnicity like we did last time, we're going to choose age. And we're going to move that over to our variables, either by dragging it or clicking that arrow in the center. But before we click OK, we're going to click on Statistics because we're trying to get new types of statistics for our analysis. When this Statistics button is clicked, it's going to open a Frequency Statistics window, and you're going to select the appropriate measures that you want to get. Here, we're going to go with all of them, so mean, median, mode, and then also our standard deviation, variance, and range. These are, again, up in the top right, you have the central tendency measures. In the bottom left, you have the dispersion measures. You can click Continue after you've checked all the ones that you want, and then click OK. It'll go into your output, and you can see all of these characteristics of the age. So we have, again, our mean is 21.01, which is something that we saw last week. This is a default. As you'll notice, the mean was already checked when you opened the statistics window. But we now also have the median. So the middlemost age of our population was 20. Then we have the mode. The most frequent one is 19. So a lot of 19-year-olds in our sample, but the average age was a little bit higher than that. What that suggests to us is there's a little bit of a skew, that we have maybe some older outliers and not so many younger outliers who are pulling it away from that median and mode. We also get our standard deviation. This is that square-rooted variance. So the variance is 6.33. The square root of that is a 2.516. This is telling us how much spread there is. So what this tells us is within one standard deviation, which is most of people, that's going to be the mean plus or minus that standard deviation. So 21.01 minus that 2.516, that's 21 minus 2.5. What is it? That's about 18.5. And then if you add 2.5 to 21, that's about 23.5. So that range from 18.5 to 23.5, most students are going to fall in that range. We also have a big range of age, a 12-point range there, which again is showcasing that there might be some outliers that are far away from that mode of 19. So that is the first method, one way to get all of these statistics through the frequencies, and you can choose your variable based on that. The other method is to go through the other way that we used last week, which is the descriptives window. Here you go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and Descriptives. You're going to, again, click Age over, which is the same variable we used last time in the descriptives window. And this time, instead of clicking OK, you're going to click Options. So in frequencies, it was statistics. In the descriptives window, it is options. Now this one has fewer options. It doesn't have the mean, median, and median and mode available. That's because it's not a frequency. It's now thinking you're using these very specific continuous variables where median and mode is not as useful because there's such a breadth of variables. So instead, it is only going to have available the dispersion metrics. So here you can look at your standard deviation and variance as well as your range, and you'll see that minimum and maximum has already been checked. Those are defaults, as well as mean is a default. So let's make sure we check all of them, click continue, and then we'll see our output. Once again, we're going to see the same kind of information. There's that mean of 21.01. Our variance of 6.33 square rooted is a 2.5. So again, we can do the math to see most of our people fall within a certain range. And here we see our minimum and maximum, that 19 to 31 range of 12 there. So there is our outlier. We can see that that 31 is really skewing the data higher than the mode of 19 that we saw from our others, from our frequency window. So this is a good way of just kind of understanding our variable. And in your checkpoint this week, you're going to be asked to get this kind of information about a different variable. All right, so now we are done. So next week, we're going to talk more about how to write a literature review now that you've found some articles, and a little bit more on APA style. Thanks so much for sticking with me, and have a great week.